The exile of humanity did not happen in a single moment. It was a slow, deliberate process, veiled in the politest of phrases, cloaked in bureaucratic language, designed to obscure the severity of what was happening. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of species stretching across dozens of sectors, had tolerated humanity for centuries, often reluctantly. Humans were audacious, stubbornly independent, and frighteningly inventive qualities that could have been celebrated had they not been so unpredictable. But unpredictability was a sin in the eyes of the Council, and unpredictability, they decided, was dangerous. First came the restrictions, limits on interstellar travel, quotas on resource extraction, and restrictions on diplomacy. Humans were increasingly relegated to minor advisory roles, their input ignored or dismissed. Then came the accusations, vague and nebulous, accusations that humans were reckless, dangerous, a destabilizing influence on the galactic balance. The Council claimed it was acting for the greater good, yet the reasoning was transparent to anyone with even a fragment of insight. The Council feared the human capacity for change, for disruption, for invention beyond predictable bounds. Finally, the edict arrived. Humanity was to be relocated, exiled to a system at the edge of the galactic charts. The stars around them would be dim, the planets inhospitable, the resources scarce. It was a punishment that masqueraded as benevolence. A chance to prove yourselves, the Council claimed, a test of your species' worth. Few humans interpreted it as anything other than exile. The system itself was hostile. Its primary sun was dying, a yellow dwarf waning toward red giant status, bathing the planets in feeble light that made agriculture difficult and solar power unreliable. The inner planets were scorched, their surfaces cracked and molten in places, while the outer worlds were frozen wastelands, their thin atmospheres poisoned with ammonia and methane. Between planets, asteroid fields and radiation belts made navigation perilous. It was a system deliberately chosen to push humanity toward extinction, or at least into quiet obscurity. The first human settlers arrived aboard a fleet of hastily retrofitted colony ships, vessels built with ingenuity and desperation, not luxury or comfort. As the ships approached the barren worlds, families watched through observation ports, hearts sinking at the sight of a landscape that seemed incapable of life. Engineers and scientists, the first to step onto solid ground, began the daunting task of survival. They carried equipment for atmospheric processing, water synthesis, and soil revitalization, but the scale of the task was staggering. At first, failure seemed inevitable. Crops died under feeble sunlight, recycled air systems failed, and the radiation proved more persistent than initial simulations suggested. The alien council, observing remotely, seemed content to let humanity struggle. "They will break," some counselors murmured. "They cannot adapt. They are meant to fail." Even among the humans, despair whispered through the corridors of settlement ships and the temporary habitats erected on barren soil. Questions were asked. Could humanity truly survive in such a place? Had the Council finally outmaneuvered them? But despair is a luxury of those untested by adversity. Humans responded, not with submission, but with innovation. Terraforming initiatives began in earnest. Engineers constructed orbital mirrors to reflect additional sunlight onto the planets, modifying light spectrums to stimulate photosynthesis. Underground farms were dug, protected from radiation, and equipped with artificial sunlight tuned to human crops. Atmospheric processes began the slow work of extracting oxygen from nitrogen-rich gases and filtering out dangerous toxins. Water was mined from ice deposits and chemically synthesized from minerals when necessary. Every failure was meticulously analyzed. Every setback became a blueprint for improvement. The first generation of human children born in exile learned resilience as a birthright. They were raised not in comfort, but in challenge. Schools taught survival in harsh conditions alongside mathematics, engineering, and philosophy. Military cadets trained in zero-gravity simulations, not for conquest, but to prepare for the uncertainties of a universe that had shown them no mercy. Every child understood that the stars they gazed upon were not empty. They were arenas of opportunity, but only for those willing to endure. Within 50 years, remarkable transformations were underway. Barren deserts sprouted life under domes and terraformed zones. Acidic lakes were neutralized through chemical engineering and algae colonies that purified water while generating biomass. Abandoned asteroid belts were converted into orbital farms and mining stations, supplying the nascent settlements with materials impossible to extract from the planets themselves. Humans had begun to turn disadvantage into opportunity, using every obstacle as a catalyst for growth. The Alien Council, watching through distant sensors, began to notice anomalies. Signals of industrial activity, energy readings that suggested more than mere survival, and strange communications between settlements that indicated a level of coordination unexpected in a species supposedly on the brink of collapse. "They are surviving," some counselors admitted, with unease creeping into their voices. "But survival is not enough. They will not rise from exile. It is impossible." Yet they underestimated the nature of humanity. Survival was never enough. For humans, every challenge was a prelude to mastery. By the 100th year of exile, humans had achieved what most alien species considered improbable. Cities of metal and glass, designed to withstand storms, radiation, and seismic instability, dotted the surface of the most habitable planets. Orbital stations linked through shuttles and teleport relays became hubs of industry, education, and governance. The human fleet, once a collection of scavenged colony ships, had grown into vessels bristling with adaptive defenses, modular weapons, and engines optimized for speed and maneuverability in hostile environments. The true genius of humanity, however, lay not in technology alone, but in culture. Leadership was decentralized, encouraging creativity and autonomy. Scientists, engineers, and tacticians collaborated across disciplines in ways that alien species with rigid hierarchies could not fathom. Every citizen contributed to the survival and growth of their civilization. Human ingenuity was not a series of isolated acts, but a continuous collective force, flowing through every level of society. And then came the first signs of challenge from beyond. Scouts from the Galactic Concord, curious and contemptuous, approached the system, expecting to find a weak, desperate species clinging to survival. What they found instead were fortified orbital stations, planetary defenses, and a fleet capable of intercepting intruders with surgical precision. The humans they sought to observe with casual superiority were no longer prey, they were predators in their own right, forged from the crucible of exile. The first probes sent by the Council to test humanity vanished without warning, neutralized by orbital weapons arrays and small, agile corvettes executing maneuvers no alien tactical algorithm could predict. Communication channels were intercepted, false messages sent to confuse and misdirect. Every action the Council attempted to undermine human progress was met with a countermeasure that seemed almost preternatural in its precision. From these humble beginnings, the seeds of the Soul Dominion were sown. Exile had not broken humanity, it had refined them. Each generation learned the lessons of scarcity, adaptation, and innovation. Where alien species relied on hierarchy, rules, and stability, humans relied on creativity, resilience, and collaboration. In a universe designed to make them fail, humanity was learning not just to survive, but to thrive. By the end of the first segment of their exile, humanity had achieved a crucial, immutable truth. No obstacle imposed by others could ever limit them. The barren worlds that had been intended as prisons had become crucibles, forging a species capable of enduring, adapting, and eventually dominating. The galaxy, they knew, would one day learn what exile had taught them. That lesson would not be gentle. It would be absolute. By the 2nd century after exile, the human presence in the desolate system had grown from a fragile settlement into a sprawling civilization. The barren planets, once marked by nothing but rock and wind, now bore the hallmarks of an industrious species unyielding in the face of adversity. Cities gleamed under artificial suns and reflective orbital mirrors. Domes stretched across irradiated plains, and subterranean farms created ecosystems, thriving beneath crusts designed to shield from relentless solar storms. Every human, from the lowest technician to the fleet commander, carried the unspoken ethos that hardship was not a punishment, but a proving ground, a crucible forging mastery from struggle. Trade and communication with rogue civilizations beyond the system became a cornerstone of humanity's rise. The Galactic Concord had assumed that exiled humans would remain isolated, shackled by resource scarcity and environmental hazards. They did not anticipate that humans would not merely survive, they would integrate, learn, and adapt. Outcast, alien factions, those ignored or oppressed by the Council, sought humanity's alliance, offering technology, genetic data, and navigational charts in exchange for cooperation. Humanity, with the patience of strategists trained over generations of hardship, accepted these exchanges selectively, building networks that would later serve both defensive and offensive purposes. Knowledge, once dismissed as minor or impractical, became the foundation of unprecedented innovation. The human fleet, initially cobbled together from salvaged ships, scavenged materials, and designs borrowed from alien technology, had become formidable. Engineers studied alien propulsion, armor, and weapons systems, then modified them in ways the originals could not anticipate. Ships were modular and adaptive, able to switch roles mid-battle, from reconnaissance to assault to support. Hulls were layered with reactive armor, energy-dissipating shielding, and stealth matrices, capable of rendering entire squadrons invisible against the void of space. Human weapon systems, too, reflected creativity born from necessity. They combined electromagnetic pulse disruptors, quantum destabilizers, and nanite-guided torpedoes, creating offensive capabilities that confounded alien strategists trained in millennia of conventional warfare. What made humanity's rise particularly terrifying to outsiders was not just their technology, but their philosophy. Unlike many alien civilizations, which relied on rigid hierarchies and inflexible command structures, humans thrived on decentralized command. Decisions were made dynamically, with officers empowered to think creatively and act independently, leveraging the talents and intelligence of their crews. Artificial intelligence served not to replace human judgment, but to augment it, providing real-time data, simulations, and tactical options, while leaving the choice and the moral responsibility to human commanders. Every engagement, every maneuver, became a reflection of human ingenuity. an unpredictable dance in the theater of war. Meanwhile, planetary development advanced in parallel. Terraforming initiatives had matured, producing breathable atmospheres where none should have existed. Oceans and lakes, initially acidic or frozen, became reservoirs of biodiversity. Plants engineered to survive in the harshest conditions were now capable of sustaining vast populations. Cities, constructed to resist tectonic activity, radiation storms, and orbital bombardment, became hubs of research, culture, and industry. The Sol Dominion had grown into an interconnected web of planets and orbital stations, each contributing to the collective strength of the civilization. Even alien observers could not deny the scale of humanity's transformation. The Alien Council, which had once dismissed humanity as a footnote, began to murmur unease. Sensor arrays recorded industrial activity far beyond what a struggling species should be capable of. Fleet movements, while ostensibly routine, demonstrated coordination and foresight that contradicted the Council's predictions. Communications traffic suggested advanced AI-assisted research programs and intelligence networks rivaling entire planetary systems. "They are surviving," admitted one counselor, voice edged with alarm. But survival alone does not explain this scale, this precision. What are they planning? And yet, for humans, the concept of planning was inseparable from adaptation. Where alien fleets relied on centuries-old doctrines and simulations based on predictable behavior, humans relied on observation, improvisation, and instinct. They learned quickly from mistakes, from attacks, from environmental hazards. Every encounter, every failure, became a repository of knowledge, feeding into designs, strategies, and tactics that grew more sophisticated with each passing decade. The Sol Dominion was evolving, not as a monolithic machine, but as a living, adaptive organism, capable of learning faster than any alien system could predict. The first real test of human resolve came not from the Council, but from rogue factions attempting to probe the Sol Dominion's defenses. A fleet of alien scouts entered the Exiled system under the assumption that humanity was weak, disorganized, and desperate. They intended a minor incursion, a show of power meant to remind humanity of their status. What they encountered instead were orbital weapons networks, perfectly calibrated to neutralize hostile ships, corvettes that seemed to appear from nowhere, and electronic warfare systems that turned the enemy's own sensors and communications against them. Entire fleets vanished into traps, disabled or destroyed without a single casualty among human defenders. The tales of these encounters spread quickly, carried by rogue factions back to the wider galaxy. Humans were no longer the isolated, struggling species the Concord had once mocked. They were predators disguised in plain sight. Their fleets, fortified worlds, and intelligence networks suggested a civilization that had not only adapted to hardship, but had mastered it. By the end of the 2nd century, the Sol Dominion was not merely surviving, it was thriving. Humanity had transformed exile from a sentence into a proving ground, scarcity into opportunity, and isolation into strength. They had become a civilization capable of exerting influence far beyond their modest origins, demonstrating that adversity, when met with ingenuity and unity, could forge power beyond imagination. The first segment of their rise had concluded. Humans were no longer the species the galaxy had underestimated. They were a force of unpredictability, intelligence, and resilience. And the galaxy would soon learn the full measure of what exile had wrought. The Sol Dominion was awakening, and nothing, not fleets, not councils, not centuries of hubris could stop it. By the 3rd century of exile, Humanity had transformed from a resilient survivor into a formidable power, a civilization capable of defending itself against threats that once seemed insurmountable. The Sol Dominion was now a system-wide network of fortified planets, orbital stations, and agile fleets, each element seamlessly integrated into a larger strategy of defense and potential expansion. Yet, for humans, war was not merely about brute force. It was about understanding, anticipating, and exploiting every variable in a chaotic universe. The alien races of the Galactic Concord had assumed that humans would be predictable, constrained by fear and limited by resources. Their fleets were structured according to centuries of doctrine, rigid formations, standardized tactics, and reliance on mathematical probabilities to dictate outcomes. Humans, however, had learned that no amount of calculation could account for ingenuity, courage, or unpredictability, the very traits that had enabled them to survive exile in the first place. In every engagement, they approached war as a living art form, fluid and adaptive, able to respond to the unexpected with creativity born of necessity. Early encounters with alien patrols provided the first opportunities to test human strategies on a grand scale. Small corvettes, lightly armed and deliberately exposed, would feign weakness to lure enemy dreadnoughts into pre-planned ambush zones. Orbital defense arrays, calibrated for rapid targeting and integrated with predictive AI, would then engage with surgical precision. Fleets executed maneuvers that seemed impossible, ships appearing simultaneously from multiple vectors, electronic countermeasures feeding false data into enemy targeting systems, and boarding parties that struck with speed and precision reminiscent of predators on Earth. Humans relied not solely on firepower, but on ingenuity and psychological tactics. Alien commanders frequently reported bewilderment at human unpredictability. Corvettes vanished and reappeared in improbable positions. Orbital arrays fired in sequences that defied algorithmic prediction, and fleets executed maneuvers that seemed to anticipate enemy thought processes. It was not luck, it was adaptation, honed over centuries of facing environments that punished error with catastrophic consequences. The Sol Dominion's military doctrine emphasized versatility and decentralized decision-making. Every captain, commander, and officer was trained to interpret overarching strategic goals and make instantaneous tactical decisions based on the evolving battlefield. This decentralized approach contrasted sharply with alien fleets, which relied on centralized command structures vulnerable to disruption. When communication arrays were jammed, human officers did not hesitate. They improvised, coordinated, and executed strategies that often turned disadvantage into advantage. This adaptability became one of humanity's deadliest weapons, more formidable than the most advanced weaponry or the largest fleet. Technological innovation advanced hand in hand with tactical development. Humans modified alien propulsion systems to enable sudden bursts of speed or evasive maneuvers in three-dimensional combat environments. Weaponry, integrated nanite-guided missiles, quantum destabilizers, and electromagnetic disruptors capable of crippling enemy vessels with minimal collateral damage. Shields were layered with reactive and adaptive components, responding to incoming attacks with near-instantaneous reconfiguration. Artificial intelligence served as a co-pilot, not a replacement, providing calculations, simulations, and predictive insights while leaving judgment and moral responsibility to humans. Every ship, every weapon, every system reflected the core human principle. Ingenuity is survival, and survival demands mastery. Beyond individual battles, humans studied the psychology and culture of their alien adversaries. Where one species might react predictably to fear or deception, another might act with arrogance or overconfidence. Humans learned to exploit these traits, crafting encounters that drew entire fleets into traps or manipulated enemy alliances. Intelligence networks spanning the Sol Dominion provided real-time data on political tensions, internal disputes, and rivalries, allowing humans to wage war not just with ships, but with information, influence, and foresight. In one famous engagement known later as the Battle of the Twin Suns, a fleet of alien invaders underestimated human capability. Expecting a simple defensive posture, they were confronted instead with a coordinated assault across multiple fronts. Orbital defense grids immobilized capital ships with precision laser strikes, while swarms of corvettes executed maneuvers that exploited every blind spot. Human electronic warfare disrupted enemy targeting, and boarding teams seized key command centers aboard flagship vessels. By the end of the engagement, the invading fleet had been neutralized with minimal human casualties, and the alien commanders were left scrambling to justify their failure. Even in victory, humans remained analytical, not complacent. Every battle was studied, every tactic scrutinized, every failure, no matter how minor, incorporated into future strategy. Fleet exercises mimicked alien doctrines to anticipate responses, while simulations explored countless alternative scenarios, testing both human ingenuity and alien expectation. The result was a force capable of evolving faster than any adversary could anticipate. A civilization whose understanding of war extended beyond raw combat into strategy, psychology, and adaptive innovation. The human approach to warfare extended to diplomacy and deterrence as well. The Sol Dominion did not seek unnecessary conflict, but maintained an undeniable presence across its system. Outposts, observation platforms, and fleets acted as both defensive structures and symbols of power. Alien civilizations quickly learned that aggression against humanity invited swift, unpredictable, and devastating consequences. By mastering the art of deterrence, humans had created a zone of influence that expanded not through conquest, but through the demonstration of capability, ingenuity, and relentless adaptability. By the end of the 3rd century, humanity's mastery of war had transformed perception across the galaxy. Once dismissed as an unpredictable, marginal species, humans were now acknowledged as a civilization capable of defending itself against any known threat. They were not simply survivors. They were strategists, engineers, innovators, and warriors whose very existence challenged the assumptions of every alien species that had ever doubted them. The Sol Dominion had become a force whose power was measured not only in ships and weapons, but in adaptability, foresight, and unyielding resilience. And yet, the humans themselves remained vigilant. They knew that complacency could undo even the greatest achievements. The galaxy remained vast, dangerous, and unpredictable. The lessons of exile were never forgotten. Survival is never guaranteed, and power is only meaningful when it is earned through constant vigilance, innovation, and unity. Humanity had learned to thrive in adversity, to turn disadvantage into opportunity, and to master the art of war in ways the galaxy had never seen. In this crucible of struggle and ingenuity, humanity had grown beyond mere survival. They had become a species that could bend challenges to their will, outthink adversaries, and shape the destiny of entire systems. The sole dominion was no longer a response to exile, it was the embodiment of human potential, a civilization that had taken punishment and forged it into unprecedented strength. And as the stars of the exiled system shone brighter under the gaze of human industry, one truth became undeniable. The galaxy had underestimated humanity at its own peril. By the 4th century of exile, the sole dominion had evolved into a civilization that no longer merely survived it, dominated its domain through ingenuity, discipline, and relentless innovation. While the early centuries had been defined by survival and adaptation, this era was characterized by consolidation, the careful integration of planets, orbital stations, fleets, and human culture into a system that was not only resilient but unassailable. The galaxy began to take notice, though few were bold enough to fully grasp the scope of humanity's achievement. The first step in consolidation was governance. The early settlements had operated with decentralized autonomy, each planet solving its own problems with ingenuity and initiative. While effective for survival, this approach risked inefficiency and fragmentation as the dominion expanded. The human solution was remarkable in its elegance, a federated system where local governance maintained autonomy but coordinated through a central council, the Solsena. Representatives were chosen not for pedigree, wealth, or species-specific hierarchy, but for expertise, creativity, and demonstrated leadership. Scientists, engineers, tacticians, and philosophers alike contributed to policy-making, ensuring that decisions were informed by practicality, foresight, and innovation. This council was not a tyrannical bureaucracy. Unlike alien governments, which relied on rigid hierarchies and fear to maintain control, the Sol Synod functioned as a collaborative network. Communication between planets was instantaneous through a system of quantum entanglement relays, enabling real-time coordination across light years. Orders were not blindly enforced. Each planet, station, and fleet had the authority to adapt directives to local conditions, improvising as necessary while remaining aligned with the Dominion's overarching strategy. The result was a civilization capable of decentralized creativity while maintaining cohesion, a balance no alien species had managed on such a scale. Economic consolidation followed governance. The barren worlds of the exiled system, once considered inhospitable, had become interconnected hubs of production, research, and trade. Orbital stations mined asteroids rich in metals and rare elements, processing them into components for ships, weapons, and infrastructure. Terraforming initiatives transformed ice worlds into arable lands, producing crops that could support billions and feed fleets on long campaigns. Surplus resources were distributed efficiently through automated logistics networks, minimizing waste and ensuring that every project from planetary defense to experimental research received what it needed. Where alien species relied on rigid supply chains, vulnerable to disruption, the Sol Dominion thrived through adaptability, redundancy, and foresight. Cultural consolidation was equally vital. Humans, exiled to a hostile system, had learned that unity and morale were essential to survival. As the Dominion matured, it codified traditions that celebrated ingenuity, resilience, and collaboration. Education became universal and multidisciplinary, blending science, strategy, and the arts to cultivate citizens capable of independent thought, innovation, and leadership. Military training was rigorous, emphasizing adaptability and critical thinking, while civic engagement encouraged every individual to contribute to the growth and security of the Dominion. Humans were not subjects, they were stakeholders, each empowered to shape the civilization's destiny. Diplomacy emerged as another pillar of human consolidation. Alien observers who had once dismissed humanity as a struggling species now approached cautiously, often seeking alliances with the sole dominion. Humans negotiated from positions of strength, leveraging technology, intelligence, and strategic foresight to form alliances advantageous to both parties. Rogue factions, outcasts, and smaller civilizations found security under the Dominion's protection, willingly submitting to cooperative agreements that expanded humanity's influence without unnecessary conquest. Through diplomacy, backed by undeniable capability, humanity extended its reach across multiple sectors, creating a buffer of cooperative systems that increased the Dominion's security and strategic depth. Despite the relative peace of consolidation, humans never ceased preparing for conflict. The lessons of exile were etched deeply into their collective consciousness. Vulnerability invited destruction. Fleets continued to train. Defenses were continuously upgraded, and technological innovation never slowed. Entire planets functioned as laboratories for new propulsion systems, advanced AI, and experimental defenses. Humans had learned that deterrence was most effective when backed by unquestionable capability, and their power projection was unmatched by any species in proximity. The consolidation of power also extended to intelligence and surveillance. The Dominion maintained a sophisticated network of sensors, probes, and informants spanning neighboring systems. Alien movements, political intrigues, and potential threats were tracked in real time, and the sole Dominion's intelligence core used this information not merely for reaction, but for shaping outcomes. By anticipating threats before they materialized, humans reduced the risk of surprise, transformed uncertainty into advantage, and ensured that no adversary could act without consequence. Knowledge, they had learned, was as formidable a weapon as any fleet or weapon system. As consolidation progressed, the sole Dominion became a civilization capable of long-term planning on a scale alien species could barely imagine. Projects that spanned centuries were initiated and carried forward without interruption. Terraforming of outer planets was coordinated with orbital construction, fleet expansion, and research initiatives. Colonies were established in previously uninhabitable star systems, connected through a lattice of relays, shuttles, and jump gates. Resources were harvested, distributed, and recycled with precision, ensuring that the Dominion's growth remained sustainable. Unlike alien civilizations, which often collapsed under the weight of bureaucracy, stagnation, or inflexibility, humanity thrived through constant iteration and adaptive innovation. By the end of this century, the sole Dominion had reached a tipping point. Exiled humans had transformed barren worlds into thriving civilizations, built fleets capable of dominating entire star systems, and created a governance structure that encouraged creativity, collaboration, and resilience. The Dominion's influence extended far beyond the exiled system, reaching into sectors once controlled by the Galactic Concord. Humans had demonstrated that adversity could be transformed into strength, and that exile, rather than limiting a species, could refine it into an unstoppable force. Alien observers began to speak in hushed tones of the human phenomenon. Where once they had dismissed humanity as unpredictable but weak, they now acknowledged the truth. The species had achieved mastery over survival, war, governance, and diplomacy simultaneously. They had transformed exile into opportunity, scarcity into innovation, and danger into power. The sole Dominion was no longer a fledgling civilization clinging to life. It was an unassailable entity, a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability. And as humans looked outward from their thriving worlds, the lessons of exile remained etched in every mind. The galaxy underestimated humanity at its own peril. Every fleet, every city, every technological marvel bore witness to the truth that no force could contain a species forged in adversity. The sole dominion was complete in its consolidation, but it was far from finished. Beyond the borders of the exiled system, countless stars waited to be explored, countless challenges awaited to be overcome, and the galaxy itself had yet to witness the full measure of humanity's power. By the 5th century, since humanity's exile, the sole dominion had matured into a civilization whose influence and power were unparalleled in the regions of the galaxy it touched. Humans no longer merely defended themselves. They projected strength, innovation, and strategy across light years with precision, unpredictability, and authority. Alien powers that had once dismissed humanity now approached the sole dominion with a mixture of caution, awe, and trepidation. The species that had been exiled to the fringes of the galaxy had become a force that no one could ignore, and its rise was a lesson in perseverance, ingenuity, and the indomitable human spirit. Humanity's fleets, now numbering in the thousands of capital ships, supported by tens of thousands of corvettes, frigates, and specialized vessels, were capable of rapid deployment across multiple systems simultaneously. Ships no longer relied solely on brute force. Their crews employed strategy, improvisation, and technological superiority in perfect unison. Human engineers had perfected slipstream propulsion and quantum jump drives, allowing entire fleets to appear at critical points almost instantaneously. This mobility allowed the sole dominion to strike with precision, defend unpredictably, and outmaneuver opponents who relied on slower, more predictable methods of engagement. Entire alien armadas found themselves ensnared in strategies they could neither anticipate nor counter. The governance of the Dominion had grown alongside its military power. The Sol Synod had matured into an interstellar federation, coordinating policy, trade, defense, and research across hundreds of worlds. Human colonies were diverse in culture and environment, yet united by shared principles, resilience, adaptability, and mutual accountability. Education, science, and the arts flourished across planets and orbital habitats, producing a citizenry capable of independent thought, rapid problem-solving, and leadership at all levels. Unlike alien civilizations that centralized authority and punished innovation, humans cultivated it. Leaders emerged based on merit, vision, and capability, creating a society capable of rapid adaptation while maintaining cohesion across the Dominion's vast expanse. Diplomacy became as formidable as fleets or weaponry. Humans did not conquer through fear alone. They extended influence through negotiation, alliances, and mutual benefit. Rogue factions, alien enclaves, and exiled populations often sought sole dominion protection, willingly integrating into its network for safety, trade, and advancement. Even the most skeptical alien powers discovered that aggression against humanity was met with calculated, overwhelming response, and that attempts to undermine the Dominion invariably backfired. Humans had mastered the art of deterrence on a scale unparalleled in galactic history, a civilization that combined technological supremacy, strategic innovation, and psychological insight into a cohesive whole that inspired both fear and respect. Conflict with major powers eventually became inevitable. Alien empires that had once dominated the sectors around humanity's exile zone could not ignore the rise of the Soul Dominion. The first confrontations tested human strategy on a galactic stage. Alien fleets assumed superiority based on numbers, advanced weaponry, or historical dominance. Humans countered with unorthodox tactics, decoys, feints, electronic warfare, and adaptive strategies that exploited the rigid thinking of alien commanders. Battles that seemed inevitable disasters for humanity became demonstrations of ingenuity, courage, and precision. Entire armadas vanished into well-orchestrated traps, while smaller, more agile human ships exploited weaknesses in alien formations, striking where defenses were weakest and forcing enemy retreats. The victories were never purely martial, they were symbols. Each engagement reinforced the legend of human adaptability and resilience. Stories spread across sectors of fleets, appearing to vanish and reappear, of smaller forces defeating overwhelming numbers, and of humans turning what seemed like disadvantage into absolute advantage. Alien civilizations began to revise their perception of the species they had once scorned. No longer was humanity a curiosity, a minor player exiled to an inhospitable system. They were a civilization to be reckoned with, a force that reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. Technological innovation remained relentless. Humans developed weapons and defenses that exploited fundamental physics in ways alien civilizations could not replicate quickly. Quantum destabilizers could unravel the structural integrity of massive ships. Nanite-guided ordnance attacked both hardware and systems simultaneously. Adaptive shields responded in real time to environmental conditions and weapon signatures. Artificial intelligence functioned not as a replacement, but as an augmentation of human ingenuity, calculating millions of possibilities in seconds while leaving the choice, the responsibility, and the creativity to human commanders. Every battle, every technological breakthrough reinforced a single truth: humans were unpredictable, unstoppable, and endlessly adaptive. As the Soul Dominion expanded, it also became a hub of culture, philosophy, and exploration. Human scientists mapped entire star systems, discovered resources, and cultivated ecosystems where none had existed before. Artists, philosophers, and engineers collaborated across planets, creating societies where intellect, creativity, and courage were celebrated. The Dominion became not only a power in war, but a beacon of civilization, a testament to what a species could achieve when driven by necessity, ingenuity, and an unyielding will to thrive. Alien civilizations who had once mocked humanity now approached with cautious respect. The Galactic Concord convened emergency councils to discuss the human phenomenon, a species that had turned exile into dominance, scarcity into abundance, and vulnerability into mastery. Even the most warlike powers hesitated, knowing that any direct confrontation with the Soul Dominion could result in catastrophic losses, not merely of ships but of political and economic influence. Humans had created a system in which the consequences of underestimation were absolute and undeniable. By the end of this era, humanity's influence stretched across multiple sectors. The Soul Dominion's fleets could defend vast territories, project power instantaneously, and adapt dynamically to any threat. Planets were interconnected, hubs of production, research, and culture. Knowledge and intelligence flowed seamlessly across the Dominion, enabling decisions that were both rapid and strategic. Humanity had transformed the galaxy's perception of its former underdog species into one of the most formidable powers in existence. The lesson was clear: Exile had not broken humanity, it had forged them. Each hardship, each scarcity, each obstacle had been transformed into strength, mastery, and innovation. The Dominion's very existence was a testament to human adaptability, courage, and ingenuity. Aliens who had once dismissed humanity as weak, irrelevant, or incapable now recognized the truth. Humans were not merely survivors, they were architects of destiny, masters of war and strategy, and an unstoppable civilization capable of bending the galaxy to their vision. In the final reckoning, the sole Dominion was not defined by its fleets, weapons, or colonies. It was defined by the spirit of humanity itself. Exiled to the edge of the galaxy, faced with environments designed to kill them, humanity had risen. They had adapted, innovated, and united. They had mastered war, diplomacy, and governance. They had become a civilization that no one could break, a species that transformed exile into supremacy, scarcity into power, and adversity into triumph. And as humans gazed upon the stars, they understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, challenges were endless, and the potential of humanity was infinite. Exile had been a crucible. Mastery was now their inheritance. The sole Dominion stood as proof. When humans are underestimated, when the galaxy counts them out, they rise and nothing, no alien power or ancient empire, can stop them.